Is that thing moving?
Yes, it is.
All right. So we was doing something wrong there. And for those that are online, I apologize. I hope it's all coming through now. So I'm going to start over. The title of my message is, We Must Be Doing Something Wrong. And again, as I stated a little earlier before the audio was fixed, this is not necessarily, this is more of a critique in the encouraging sort of way, and not trying to bash somebody or bash us. And when I say us or we, I'm certainly starting with me, and of course us individually, both as individuals and collectively as our local church. But probably more, I'm probably looking at more at the Christian church as a whole, the whole sort of universal church. It appears to me, just observations, and I think you will agree with some of these things, that we are not operating the way in the fullest extent that is possible or that is called for in the Scriptures. And so I want to use as my text, Mark 16:15, verses that are very familiar with us. And it's the Great Commission. And it starts off, and he said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." We understand that to be our Great Commission, our job. One of the last things Jesus has said, very important. And so, all right, we need to be doing that. And then it goes on and talks about who believes and will be saved and who does not believe will be condemned. And it says, "These signs will accompany those who have believed." List 5 things. "In my name they shall cast out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up serpents. If they drink anything deadly, it will not hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick and they will get well." And so one of my questions is, are those things manifesting in our individual lives? Are those things manifesting ourselves in our church or in our churches universally? I think there are some. But I think if we were honest and were grading ourselves, we might, when's the last time I cast out a demon in Jesus' name? Or picked up serpents out there. We've talked about that in some previous sessions about. You're not picking up a serpent person back there. Okay. Drinking, but these things are suggestive of things that ought to be manifest in our lives, both individually and I think collectively as a church. And when we're not seeing those things, and this is just a short list of what he's saying, sort of brings the question, if these things aren't manifesting in our lives, do we really believe? I mean, really, if it says those things will accompany, they use the words accompany, signs. Hey, if I walk in somewhere and the sign over my head says this, and you think, wow. But if signs are not accompanying me, if these things aren't manifest in what I'm doing or what we're doing, are we really believing? Because that word believe, that's more than just a head knowledge or sort of an agreeing that something is there. There's a whole lot more to that. And so if those things aren't manifesting in our lives, are we really believing? We might, but we're certainly not operating in the manner in which we ought to be operating. Let's take it a step back to the first sentence, the real commission. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. Are we preaching the gospel individually? Because it's more than Pastor Tommy or me or anybody else here or in any other pulpit or podium or whatever. We're preaching every day. The question is, are we preaching the gospel? We're preaching something by the way we interact with our fellow co-workers, family, friends, people we see at Walmart, wherever. We're preaching just by walking around. It might just be a word here or a word there. We talk about seeds and planting seeds and the return on seeds, and it's sort of like that. But are we preaching the gospel, or are we preaching the truth? I mean, when's the last? Can we look at ourselves and when's the last time you witnessed to somebody? And if we're not witnessing to somebody, why aren't we? And there's one of those questions. Why aren't we witnessing to people? Are we embarrassed? Ashamed? Fear of being called a hypocrite or whatever? Or are we reluctant or unsure because we really don't know what we're talking about? That might be a big one. 1 Peter 3:15, we talked about this the last time, I talked about this the last time I spoke. And it's sort of the apologist view. An apologist is not somebody apologizing as I'm sorry for something. It's the word there that's used there is defender. Sort of, can we defend the faith? And 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be ready to give a logical defense to anyone who asks you to account for the hope and confident assurance elicited by faith that is within you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So another question that comes in, can we clearly and succinctly tell someone why we believe what we believe in a manner that's convincing? I'm afraid, or my concern is, we can't do that convincingly or succinctly or clearly, and thus we don't do it, which is contrary to what we're commissioned to do. Now, you're going to maybe see that I have a few peeves about certain things. This may be one of them. Or do we turn people off by adding facts that are not really facts? Or are we espousing opinions that are not expressly clear in the Bible? So, what are those? Let me give you an example. And if I told you this guy's name, you'd hear him because he's a prominent preacher on social media, TV, and whatnot. Anyway, and we talked a little bit about creation last time, and I don't want you to get hung up on the creation because there's a bigger point here. But anyway, this guy's somebody that I really, for everything else that I've heard, I think, man, he's right on. And he is he gets after some others in the faith, if you will, and sort of says, hey, I don't think that person is preaching what they should be preaching because, he has very legitimate reason. He does it, I'd say lovingly, but he does it really rather firmly. But anyway, he made this statement, essentially that if God didn't create the world in 6 days and the rest of the Bible isn't true. And this whole sermon I've been listening to him, and I've listened to him fairly regularly, and that kind of struck me as, you went all absolutism on an issue that may not be expressly clear in the Bible. Because I don't think that the Bible is necessarily unequivocally clear about that particular issue. And again, that's the point is, now you may say, brother, it clearly says day 1, day 2. Okay, I will agree with that. I will agree that your translation says that. But that's doesn't necessarily what the original Hebrew says. Could say that, but he also might say something else. Because that word for day in the original Hebrew is a word called yom, Y-O-M. That word has, in the original form, multiple meanings. 4 literal meanings, actually. Part of the daylight hours, all of the daylight hours, a 24-hour period, a long but finite time frame. There was no other word in the original Hebrew to identify a long passage of time. So when Moses is using that word, he uses the word day. It gets translated to us, or he used the word yom. Our translations over time have narrowed that down into the word day. And again, don't get caught up on is it one or the other, because that's sort of the question. Which one is it? Is it 6 days of creation? And this guy was saying if it isn't 6 days, then the rest of the Bible isn't true. And then that's the point I'm making, is sort of being critical of his absolutism on this particular issue. Was it 6 miraculous days, or was it billions of years? I don't know that we can know that. I think that it is quite possible. We know for certainty that God created, Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. But I think the when and the how are not necessarily important, if you follow what I mean. That God created it, absolutely. The how and the when and the where and the why, I'm not sure that really makes a difference if we believe number one. It could be one, it could be the other. And if you throw down the gauntlet and say it was this way, or the other way, there's some scientific Christian scientists that says, hey, the billion-year theory is supported by the other. If you say it one way or the other, and you run the risk of alienating someone who may have had a valid belief that it was the other way. Most importantly, you could be wrong, because I don't think it is quite expressly clear which way it happened. And that's sort of my point. We're not going to know everything there is to know, I don't think, in this life. There's the New Testament talks about we see through a glass dimly. We can see through it. We can tell some things. We might not want to swear that if we look through our glass here, that sort of, we might tell that a car went by, I guess what you call it, the depression glass, but sort of blurry glass. Y'all know, those of y'all watching on the internet, we're talking about our glass that's sort of blurry, or depression glass. We might be able to be solemn that a particular vehicle went by, or that some person walked by on the outside. But we might not be able to be as hard and fast and say, oh, well, that was Kevin that just walked by, or that was a green Toyota Celica that just went by. We can tell something went by, and that's all we really need to know, or to be, I guess, satisfied with, is that something went by. If we go beyond that, we might very well be speculating. And again, I don't want you to get hung up on this particular thing. The point is the risk of alienating someone you may be trying to witness to that might hold a different view. This weekend, two couples that were friends of my daughter's came over for 4th of July. And we kind of got to talking about some things, and we were we were more listening than talking. We kind of got into a little witnessing mode, if you will, not really hard and heavy. But one young man started sort of expressing some disillusionment, I guess would be the way to put it. And the problem was, that person who was representing himself as a Christian, he may very well have been a Christian, was telling him something and espoused one of these absolute views. And he said, and when he heard that, he said, basically said, I just dismissed everything else he had to say because I didn't believe the whatever. And they were actually older, younger. That was sort of the dispute that they were talking about. And it lost me. And he went on to talk about, well, science, this, that, and the other. And I said, hey, you didn't, I said, let me get this straight. You dismissed him because of the representation he made to you that the Bible clearly said it was his way or the highway on this particular issue. He said, yeah. I said, you tell anything else? He said, yeah, but I didn't listen to it. And I told him, I said, well, could be the other way. Oh, well, that's what I believe, but this guy didn't believe it. And he told this other gentleman totally lost a chance to perhaps develop a little more rapport, a little something with him. Gone. Now, not only did he mess it up for himself, I don't know that the young man was really receptive to what I had to say, even though I was sort of agreeing with him that I think the other guy was wrong in his interpretation because of that one guy. The point I'm trying to make is we need to be careful about the words we use and the absolutisms that we might sort of put out there that we really can't be certain about. There are certainly some other things. Another one, I don't want to get lost in some of these examples, but we had someone spoke here fairly recently, someone I really respect. He had a book. He had a book on a particular topic. And my issue is certainly not with this guy, loving, great preacher. But he had a topic in his book where he took an absolute position on something that I don't know the answer. Number one, I wasn't there, he wasn't there, we wasn't there. A lot of things we weren't there, so we don't know. And it doesn't expressly say it's one way or the other. But he took that sort of... Now, I would like to say that I'm mature enough that I can overlook that, and hopefully that I can. Overlook that I have this disagreement with him. But I do have this disagreement with him. And some other folks for that matter. And again, this is getting back to being that particular issue, whether it's one way or the other, on any of these issues. We don't need to be hard and fast on what's not really important. Getting back to our original thing about going into the world and preaching the gospel. The gospel message ought to be simple. I want to give you somewhat of an example of it. And is it are we really preaching the gospel? Are we leading people to Christ? And if not, why aren't we? Why are we not? Think about the gospel in sort of the context of my line of work. And I think of the gospel sort of like this, sort of generally is, are we telling people the truth, the whole truth? Here's the big one. Nothing but the truth. Now, I have had occasion to cross-examine a lot of police officers in my life. Those are pretty honest guys. Every now and then, I'll have one that, no question, they're telling the truth. But a lot of times they add in stuff that's a little unnecessary, ostensibly to enhance their case for whatever particular case it is. Now, some of those guys I don't think appreciate that their job is essentially, if they arrest someone, they have to establish probable cause, and that's really the end of their job. Did you have probable cause to believe that so-and-so did something? Yes. And you arrest him. That's their job. Their job isn't necessarily to convict him, although that's kind of their side of the street. So in order to they sort of embellish, I guess you might say, would be the right word. And so I thought about this in terms of how we express or preaching the gospel. And so, are we telling people the truth? Yeah, we probably are. The whole truth? We might need to work on that one. Or are we telling them other things? Are we adding in extra things based on our own interpretation of what we think is the truth? I think the Bible refers to those extra things as yokes or stumbling blocks. I'm going to give you an example. And I love this reference in Acts 15. And I'll read the first two verses here. Some men came down from Judea and began teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised in accordance with the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Paul and Barnabas disagreed greatly and debated with him. Now, essentially what was going on here is you had sort of these Jewish folks out preaching the gospel, but they were saying, but in addition, we got all these other things you need to be doing. And Paul and Barnabas were like, wait a minute now. We want to dispute you on that. And so what they did, wisely I think, they all decided, hey, let's get together and let's sort of decide what's the right thing to do here. Peter, when they had this council meeting here, Peter says, and I'm assuming he is addressing these people that are sort of adding this following the law requirement before you can be saved. Why are you testing God by placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we have been able to endure? Because we believe that we are saved through the precious, undeserved grace of the Lord Jesus, which makes us free from the guilt of sin, grants us eternal life in just the same way as they are. I think what they're saying here, and I will conclude with one of those things here, we need to put the good news out there. Put the gospel out there. It's not necessary at that time. It's certainly, I don't think it's a requirement, anything beyond the belief of it, of following. Now, we should thrive or strive to do those things which are right, but they're not prerequisites to salvation. James, a little bit further on in there, when he's sort of explaining, okay, here's what I think, and you'll see further where seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us to instruct them. And so they were instructed. It says, "It is my judgment that we do not trouble and make it difficult for those who are turning to God among the Gentiles by putting obstacles in their way." And they decided not to burden them with it. They did have a couple of things. They said, don't eat food offered to idols. You can go back to Exodus and see that. Avoid foods, but avoid things where the animal was strangled. And I assume that the blood is in there. I think that's probably a pretty good idea anyway. I don't know if that's necessarily a requirement of anything. And avoiding sexual immorality. That was basically, hey, you want to follow something, follow these couple of things, but otherwise we're going to let you kind of work that out yourself. And one part about this, and we were talking about Paul and Barnabas kind of disagreeing with them and debating. All throughout the New Testament, I think this is something that we don't do enough of, and there's some reasons, but maybe reasons why we don't do it, or don't do it some. But I think it's something that we're missing, of this debating and persuading amongst ourselves, let's say, of sort of getting together and deciding what is the truth of the matter. What should be our simple, unified gospel message that we can teach a little one to go to school and tell his friends, or we can tell, some of the other folks, some older folks, young, any group of folks whatsoever. Let's keep it simple. And can we honestly and effectively debate some of those things inside the church? And I had sort of note to myself was, that's something we probably ought to start with privately, with someone that, hey, let me see what you think about it. Someone that you would respect or you felt like would have some insight into it, and sort of share what you think, get their insight to it. And you may find that in doing so, you might have some disagreement as to the way you believe a certain point. We've had debates with my mom and dad about some of these and again, most of these things are, in the big picture, relatively unimportant. And my point of some of this is not to ultimately decide which way is right or wrong. Obviously, there might be some where you can reach a conclusion and say, I thought it was this way, but after hearing from them, I'm persuaded that that might not be correct. That might be one aspect of it. Or it might be that you might have one person says this, one person says that, and it kind of ends up in this. It could be one, it could be the other. Perhaps we need to agree that that's the answer. It could be one, could be the other, unless it's something unless it's expressly stated, or that we can reach some consensus, like overwhelming consensus, that a certain thing ought to be the way we ought to see it, the way we perceive it, the way we ought to preach it or teach it. That we might be resolved to settle it on, hey, we're just going to say that God created the heavens and the earth. Beyond that, we're not going to hold anybody to a standard of, if you believe it was this or you believe that, because it could very well be either one. Could it be 6 miraculous days? Absolutely. Could it have been? Who knows? We weren't there. It's not expressly clear. So let's not get hung up on it. It's kind of one of those, there's some verse about endless genealogies. What's the...
Don't get the strife over it.
Basically, don't get bogged down in stuff that really doesn't mean anything. I totally agree with that. My other point is, let's be willing to leave certain things at, hey, maybe agree to disagree type of things on those particular issues, so that we're perhaps not alienating somebody that we're going out to witness to, or that, that we're keeping a message that we can say is biblically sound, or not giving someone a reason to say, well, I don't know that that's right. Okay, it may be right, it may be wrong. Of being able to resolve it on that basis. So, which sort of brings me to this topic. We're talking about this debating years. Are we? We might be doing something wrong individually, and that's each and every one of us has to sort of look inwardly as to, am I doing things right? Am I doing things wrong? We ought to strive to be doing things right, but we as Christians know that we're forgiven. Though we fall, we won't be cast down. The Lord will uphold you. It's basically that moving forward. Hey, I might fall. I might get, football analogy, I might get tackled, but I got to get up and run the next play. If I just lay there and give up, well then, I've lost. It's that constantly moving forward. And it might be one step forward, 2 steps back, but then to be followed with 2 steps forward, moving forward. And you're going to have some regression at times, sure. But basically moving forward. But I wanted to lead me to the topic of individually, I think we can all see that. And I think we certainly need to be careful not to judge others, certainly for things that aren't, that kind of want to, you mind your own business, you won't be minding mine. Or sweep behind, let's see, what is it? Sweep around your own back porch, for an old colloquial saying. Get the speck out of your eye before you got to go get the beam out of somebody else's eye.
Judge not that you be judged.
And it's
Amen.
What you meet toward others will come back to you.
exactly that. I think that sometimes we want to, in an effort, I think, to win someone over, and not to say that certain things that somebody might be doing might not necessarily be good ideas or good habits or whatever. That might not necessarily be the time and place to address those things. If you're trying to get somebody saved, you don't go give, oh, hey, you got to take a bath before you come inside. Okay, no. Let's get you saved, and we'll clean you up as we go along. I think it would be the more rather thing to do. But getting to, are we doing things right as a church, or might we be doing something wrong? And I'm not saying this necessarily about our church, but generally about church collectively. Are we seeing these manifestations of the things that these signs that are following us? I mean, are we? I think we've all been in churches at times, in our church at times, where those things manifest themselves. But shouldn't they be manifesting themselves on a all the time basis? And if they're not, we're doing something wrong. And that we might turn that W upside down, and that we might be me doing something wrong, because who is the church but a bunch of me's, us's, we individuals, and might we ought to, in good prudence, examine everything we're doing, not only on our individual basis, like we talked about before, but kind of take a look back every so often and say, are we doing the right things? That might be as simple as, I don't know, are we doing the right format? How many churches, I think we fall into patterns of, we come in, we have the announcements, we take up the offering, we sing a couple songs, we have a sermon, we go home. And that next week, repeat, next week, repeat. And nothing's being manifested. Now, a lot of that, that might have a whole lot to do with the folks more so to do with the folks in the pews than it does the person behind the thing. But I think it involves everyone, I think. I've thought about this. What about the songs that we're singing? Or the manner in which we're doing them? Now, I'm not being critical about this, because I really don't know the answer to this, or really haven't resolved what I think about it. But we see some churches that they're, I guess for lack of a better word, song service or praise and worship, kind of like a rock concert. With the lights and the smoke. There's some that have lights and smoke. And there's a certain appeal to that. Okay, is there something inherently wrong with it? I don't know that there's anything inherently wrong with it. Might there be a time and place issue? Perhaps. What about the words to the songs that we're singing? Are they really biblical? Now, I am tickled because I know that Kevin and Sherry here sing a lot of the songs that we used to sing at the original Liberty Church we went to back in the 1970s and 80s over in Pensacola with Brother Ken Summerall was pastor. The songbook. Hey, do you have a songbook? Do you have it at your house? Because I had one and now I don't. I really like it back. But what was impressed upon me, or what's impressed me, and always has impressed me about that, and those particular songs, that we were predominantly singing Bible verses put to song. I have a better memory of the Bible verses. If someone starts a verse, I hear the tune. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. That's in the Bible. You think of all of the biblical songs, and not that I don't have a complaint, we have great song service. But ought we might to think about concentrating, doing on some of the ones that we can clearly say, hey, we're singing directly out of the Bible. We're not getting this wrong for certain. Not only are we not getting it wrong because of what we're saying, but perhaps another means of getting the word into us and in such a, from your ear to your, getting it in us in such a way. There's probably something about that because I don't think that's unique to me. That you can remember songs more so than you can remember just words or dicta or verses. Something to look at? Yeah, I think we ought to. Just the same way we are to be introspective about our individual lives and the things that we're doing, and we need to do that on a constant basis. I think we need to do that collectively as a church. Well, what else should we be doing? Both individually and collectively. And this is from Ephesians 4:11 through 13. And this is sort of where I think what we understand to be the fivefold ministry. And his gifts to the church were varied, and he himself appointed some as apostles, which are special messengers and representatives. Some as prophets, who speak a new message from God to the people. Some as evangelists, who spread the good news of salvation. And some as pastors and teachers, to shepherd and guide and instruct. And he did this to fully equip and perfect the saints, which is God's people, for works of service. Now, isn't that what it's all, that's what church ought to be about. Now, we can, as a practical matter, understand that there are perhaps some, this is not an excuse, but we might have some limitations based on numbers or enough folks with qualifications to fit those roles. But I think we ought to endeavor and look at putting this into practice. Not just us, I'm talking about church everywhere. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily be depending on one person to fulfill all five of these jobs. I think not that we don't have a capable person to be able to do those things. I think we're putting on that. If we're just, well, I'm going to just sit back and let him do it all. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be. I think there needs to be active participation from the folks in the pews, if you will, to be those apostles, to be that prophet, to be that evangelist, to be a pastor and a teacher, to perfect the saints for works of service. Because that goes back to our original thing we were talking about, a Great Commission, that work of service going out and preaching the gospel. So Rusty, what are you saying? I think we need to step it up individually. What does that mean? Well, we need to know more. Study more. We need to study to show ourselves approved. So that we can know, the rightly dividing the word of truth. You've got to have, I think, and me bigger than anybody else maybe. we've got to know that which we believe, because if you don't know what you believe, you're certainly not going to be able to tell it to somebody else. Either you're going to be reluctant to because you kind of have a realization, I really don't know what I'm doing here. And that's unfortunate. Or perhaps worse, attempting to do it, and you really don't know what you're talking about, but you're endeavoring to talk about something that you really don't know, and you know how that comes out. That comes out with that adding stuff to it, adding your opinion or your... and again, nothing wrong with having your opinion. I just don't necessarily think we ought to espouse our opinions unless it's quite unequivocally clear that our opinions are not opinions, we're just restating the truth or the facts. So I want to get to another little topic, and this is sort of in line of when we're preaching the gospel, of being very cognitive or being very aware of the words that we're using and how the person we're attempting to communicate those words, what are they hearing? My little thing I put here, but church phraseology. I think we collectively, we can be bad. I think that's a problem, that we might not realize it, because when we talk, we may hear in the church, may know what one means when one says something. But when you think about it, someone unbeliever hearing these particular, I'm going to share a few of them with you. Just like the young man who dismissed the one guy who took the view, you start off with some of these phrases, and you're going to lose people, and it's not going to just ruin your chance. It's going to quite possibly ruin the next person's chance who may have it and may be a lot better equipped to do it. Here's one. The Lord told me. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that I have ever heard from the Lord, or I heard from the Lord is another one of those things. Now, I think we all know what that means when we express that. But I think we need to be careful in using words like that to someone we might be, and we might not need to necessarily use those words. We might need to avoid using them within the church. And instead, we may have to sort of decide what's the most appropriate thing to say. I think when we know, we kind of say, well, we know what you mean by that. It means you're praying, you're reading, and it comes to you some particular word, phrase, sentence, thought, ought to do this. We characterize it by saying it, I heard from the Lord. But using that phraseology may be a little confusing to folks. Again, we understand it as church folks, but those phrases are lost on others. Another one, I think that we use the word faith. I'm not sure we always use that word accurately. A lot of times we use the word faith as we describe believing. Of course, now believing, that's not just a head knowledge word. Believing, if you really believe something, you'll put some action into that today. Now, a gentleman in my office, and I was just sort of, I thought, hey, let me ask you something. I told him what I was going to be doing. He made a really good point. He said about the word believe. He said, if I told you that I went and put $1 million in the bank in your name, but you didn't ever go and access it, you obviously didn't believe what I said. I said, yeah. He said, now if you believed what I told you, and he was making reference to the biblical principle. If you really believed that I had put $1 million in the bank in your name, you'd probably go down to the bank and try to get some of it. You wouldn't just sit back and say, oh, I don't have any money to pay the bills. If you really believe that Charles put $1 million in your account at the bank, you'd put some action to that belief and go down there and access it. I thought that was a really good point. And again, that word faith. Now, I was going to talk about, and we're going to wrap it up here. You know, historically in the church, there's been schisms in the church. Some of these schisms, or potential schisms, were sort of intercepted here in the early church, as we see by this council they had. And I'm assuming that, although it may not be written, that in addition to that, hey, let's don't impose all these stumbling blocks or yokes or add all these things to these Gentiles that we're trying to convert. I'm assuming they probably talked about a whole lot of other stuff about, hey, and we ought to be doing this, that, and the other. I think this idea of getting together and counseling, probably a pretty good idea. Probably would avoid schisms, if you will. And you look at, I mean, I'm sure all of us have been in churches that grew out of other churches that split from other churches, or you at least heard about it if you hadn't been a part of it. And then, you know, but there was a number of councils in those first early church immediately following, you know, when the disciples were still alive. You had some in a couple hundred years later that decided certain things, and they all kind of got together, and it was sort of like, it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and us. And you had this concrete set of sort of maybe beliefs about some of those things that may or may not be expressly clear, or how to approach those things. And I have been recently, my son Jake, who he was at work, but he'll hopefully watch it later. He was showing me some stuff on the Orthodox Church, the present day Orthodox Church, which we kind of refer to as the Eastern Orthodox Church. But they actually can trace themselves back to Andrew, Peter's brother Andrew, who had the first church in Constantinople. That church is still there. I was just amazed. He was showing me a little YouTube thing. They still have somebody in charge there. And they went on for, you know, probably 1,000 years, where they had sort of this 5-part division of their church, or they had 5 sort of leaders of their church. I think it was the Bishop of Antioch, the Bishop of Constantinople, some other places, and Bishop of Rome. Well, then they come about, and the Bishop of Rome decided they were 5 leaders among equals, or equals among them. They had some sort of phraseology for it. Then they came along and sort of had this, where the Bishop of Rome says, well, I think I'm in charge, and went off on his, and started doing things their own way. And so, I've sort of always thought of those particular, you know, that's the Catholic Church, Rome, the Catholic Church, the other. It's not necessarily like that. Leading up, and so you had sort of this schism, and so people started doing certain things their own way. And I guess my point is here, we need to avoid schisms, both in our families, in our local church, collectively, in the things that we're doing, because you had things going both ways, and then you had some people bringing in some ideology that might not necessarily have been the Bible's. Leading up to where you finally, Martin Luther in the around 1500 said, talking about the Catholic Church, said, hey, y'all got something wrong. You're talking about our topic today was, you might be doing something wrong. He said, y'all are doing this wrong. Of course, he had all of these, a lot of reasons as to why. So he sort of schismed off. And you might say that that's sort of a good thing, I guess. I'm not so certain. You know, we've got now today, because of these schisms, how many denominations do we have? Just in the Christian church. From the Orthodox that have basically remained sort of unchanged since the beginning. You got the Catholic Church, some of you familiar with some of the things in the Catholic Church. Some good and some that I'm not so certain about. And the same thing in our denominations. I don't think it's supposed to be that way. You know, I think that we have, you know, I found this to be, I didn't know this, but Jake showed me this and it's apparently true. Martin Luther, you know, probably, did he have a good idea? Sure. But there were some people that were framing to take some books out of the Bible. He was one of them. He wanted to take the book of James out of the Bible. Apparently that's what happened. And his reason for it because he thought faith, he was talking about faith. We're saved through faith. And that was basically the faith, saved by faith through grace. Or faith by grace through faith. And of course, you know, if you look at the book of James, the book of James talks about, here's James, what is the benefit, my fellow believers, if someone claims to have faith but has no good works as evidence? I said all about the schisms and stuff, kind of to narrow it down to this point, is it's not enough, it's not enough to just hear it. We hear it. Faith comes by hearing. Okay. But that's not the end all of it. It starts with hearing. But you can hear something and it go one in and out the other. I had somebody, that was a girl in my office today, and I was actually telling her about what I was going to talk about. And I said, let me ask you a question. I said, you go to church? Yeah, I go to church. I said, what did the pastor preach about last Sunday? And she's like, oh my goodness. And she couldn't remember. And I said, don't worry about it. I mean, you're not the only person that can't remember what got preached about in church last Sunday. I said, did you hear it? She said, I heard it. But you didn't really hear it. She said, yeah, I didn't really hear it. Because it's not just hearing. It's understanding. And once understanding, then we got to put that understanding into practice by action, and those actions being works. Again, it's not just one thing. It's an ongoing process. Hearing, understanding, putting that understanding into action. Being careful about what we're saying. And I'm concluding all this with, we need, I think, again, to keep, if we're out there, if we're doing what we're supposed to do, preaching the gospel, we need to keep it simple. We don't need to put burdens that don't exist on people, or put stumbling blocks on people to make them think they got to live up to some standard before they can cross the threshold. Let's get them across the threshold. And then with patience and love and all of those things, like we went back to that 1 Peter 3:15. It was talking about defending the faith. I'm going to read. Do it with gentleness and respect, that's just another way of saying do it in love. Don't be condemning, don't be judgmental. Let's endeavor to preach the gospel. God puts eternity in all men's heart. Let's get them across. Let's get them across the finish line, not the finish line. Let's get them across the threshold. And then in love, if there are issues that they have to work out with, work with them. Folks know what the issues they have. Let's not let those issues hold us, or let those issues bog them down from crossing over into a state of salvation. They can work those things out from amongst themselves. So are we doing something, might be doing something wrong? Yeah. But the good thing is, if we're doing something wrong, we can change that into doing something right. Being introspective, both personally, individually, collectively, debating, discussing, counseling. I think all of those things would work together for us so that we could effectively fulfill that commission of going into all the world and preaching the gospel. Well, that's all I've got for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching online. Pastor Tommy will be back. You may say, thank goodness, Pastor Tommy will be back. Sunday morning, you will be here at 10:30 for our worship service. We'll be back right after 11 on our live stream. Look forward to having you. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Cut. And now is it just those words?